Hey you all, thank you guys so much for tuning in to today's Facts About video. Once again, if you haven't followed me on TikTok, go ahead and do so because a couple weeks ago, I did ask who you all would like to see featured for this month's videos. So shout out to Purple Haze 001 for the recommendation of Septima Clark. I learned so much about this woman because she was an integral part to the 1960s civil rights movement. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So it is no surprise that many of us, including myself, did not know who Septima Clark was, but that's because much of the 1960s civil rights movement was centered around our black male leaders. But there were so many people that were playing parts behind the scenes and even in front, but they didn't get as much publicity as they should have. But Septima Clark was known as the queen of the movement, or the mother of the movement, and she played a very major part in a lot of things that we as people that live in the new millennium and the 2020s take granted for. But I'm here to change that. Septima Clark was born on May 3rd, 1898 during Reconstruction in Charleston, North Carolina. She was born to a former slave, and her mother was a unique case. Her mother was born in the States, but she grew up majority in Haiti. So she was kind of a Haitian woman, or a majority a Haitian woman. So it is said by Clark that she grew up with a very strict mother. Her mother wanted her daughters to be upstanding citizens and young women, and she was very strict on her girls. She was one of 8 children, and is said by Clark that she was very lenient on her brothers. Her brothers were able to, kind of do and live and be whatever they wanted, but her and her sisters had to, do chores and schoolwork, and they were only allowed to have friends one day a week over. I was like, girl, dang. Well, I can see where the dedication comes for education. Clark did eventually get a formal education, and in 6th grade, she was able to take a special test, and she tested out of the next 3 grades and was put into 9th grade. She did end up going to Avery Normal Institute, which was a private school for black children, and she graduated in 1916. And in 1916 to 1919, Clark would become a teacher in Johns Island, South Carolina. One thing about Septima Clark, she was dedicated to educating people. Even as an African-American educator, she had trouble finding work as a teacher in the rural South Carolina, but she did eventually find a position, and she would teach children during the day and adults at night. So another thing that I love about Septima Clark is she was the HBCU queen. She went to 3 HBCUs for her education. She studied under W.E.D. Du Bois at Clark Atlanta University. She got her bachelor's from Benedict, and she got her master's from Hampton University. Now, given the time frame, these schools were probably her best options to get her best education because they were black institutions, and this is during Jim Crow, but still, like, what? Yes, we love it. Also in 1919, Septima Clark joined the NAACP Charleston chapter, where she started much of her work around literacy and voter registration rights. The reason Septima Clark's work in literacy and voter registration was so important was because they would make black people take literacy tests in order to register to vote. Now, this is also wildly unfair because slavery had just ended in 1865 and black men were given the right to vote in 1870. But most slaves couldn't read because they weren't allowed to. So they can't effectively take a literacy test in order to vote. Therefore, they wouldn't pass. Therefore, they weren't given the right to register to vote, which defeats the whole purpose of being able to vote in 1870. So if black people want, and then another thing, if black people don't know the issues or they can't read the issues on the ballot, then, you know, you can't properly vote for things. So there were a lot of things that were working against Black people, and their rights, and them learning how to, you know, defend themselves in a legal fashion as far as voting goes in this country. Also, being a Black educator and a part of the NAACP, Clark worked tirelessly for the rights of Black teachers in South Carolina. She participated in the Class Act lawsuit that led to the pay equality for Black teachers in that state. She worked alongside people like Thurgood Marshall. Of course, white people is always moving the goalpost, and in 1956, South Carolina passed a statute that would ban the city and state employees from being a part of civil rights organizations. Clark refused to leave the NAACP and was fired from her teaching job in South Carolina and was not able to be hired in that state, losing her teaching pension after working as a teacher for over 40 years. So because Clark could no longer get work in South Carolina, she ended up moving to Tennessee, and she began to teach a adult literacy class at the Highlander Folk School, a grassroots education center dedicated to social justice. Clark believed that literacy and political empowerment were inextricably linked. So in her class, she taught basic literacy, the rights and duties of U.S. citizens, and how to fill out a voter registration form. These workshops and programs that Clark would help to create would become known as citizenship schools. And in 1961, Clark became the director of education with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and they would use her workshops as a foundation to help increase voter registration in the African American community. Clark was so good at her job, she got the notice of Martin Luther King, and he was like, oh, she out here doing God's work. I was like, yes, we love to see it. And her work was so integral because, once again, in the South, there were so many or so few opportunities for literacy and education. So she was literally doing things that would help people not only with voter registration, but in their lives beyond that. Due to Clark's tireless efforts with the SCLC and voter registration, we will also start to see more African Americans become elected officials. 1970, Clark would eventually retire from the SCLC, and she would also fight to have her teaching pension reinstated in the state of South Carolina. She won. She would later go on to serve 2 terms on the Charleston County School Board, and she would receive the Living Legacy Award from President Jimmy Carter in 1979. Sadly, on December 15th, 1987, Septima Clark would pass away. I truly enjoyed learning about Septima Clark this week. As the kid of a retired English teacher and African American studies teacher, she resonated with me in a lot of different ways, because she loved to educate not just children but also adults, and that just, you know, education just means a lot to me. It's played a really big part in my life. So I think, you know, she's just a beautiful woman. I know a lot of us, you know, love to give our flowers to people that are living during Black history, but I love to be able to put a face to those that, you know, did things for us and worked hard for the movement, as far as civil rights goes for Black people in this country. Because we hear so many times, you know, our ancestors fought for our right to vote, and so many people fought for our right to vote. Well, Septima Clark was a living embodiment of that work. You can finally now put a face to somebody that worked extremely hard for voter rights for Black people in this country. And especially with everything going on around now in regards to education and, you know, and especially in the state of Florida, where, you know, they've literally passed bills, you know, to not be able to teach critical race theory and to not make white people feel guilty for, you know, the racist past of this country. It is crazy. And also, you know, things that are being passed as far as voter registration in this country. It means so much that we make sure that our rights to vote and our rights to be heard in this country are here and stay in place, because without it, you know, the work that Septima Clark did and so many others is just in vain. And we're going backwards instead of forwards. So, once again, I hope that you learned just as much about Septima Clark as I did this week. And if you, you know, choose to do more research about her, you know, more power to you. But I thank you guys so much for watching. And as I say at the end of all of my videos, I thank you guys so much for watching, because you could have been anywhere else on the internet, but you decided to watch me. Thanks. Bye.